Still settling in, but yeah, this is actually live now. So what we're doing is a live stream tonight, a discussion, a conversation. We don't all know each other that well here tonight, so we're also going to get to know each other a little bit better. So my name's Hester, and I do lots of different things at the moment. I'm a mum. I'm an out of work fitness instructor. I live in Deptford in southeast London, and I'm really interested in community building and community democracy and communities being able to take back power into their own interests. So that means that councils like spend council tax on local issues, that they're accountable for what their spending goes on, things like the police, things like education, all the different services. And what we're going to talk about tonight and look at is a new film by Steve McQueen, Mangrove, which is set in 1968 in Notting Hill. I was actually born in Hammersmith, and I used to spend a lot of time in Ladbroke Grove and Latimer Road in Notting Hill when I was at secondary school. Oh yay, Leela's here. And actually, because West London is so changed now, like it was, Notting Hill is not what it was like 50 years ago. It got pretty gentrified quite quickly, and like Kensington there's only a very small area of Kensington really now, which is a migrant community still. Most people got priced out of where they lived, but where I live in Deptford in southeast, it's still lots of migrant communities. And actually some of the filming for Mangrove, they used Amersham Vale. They used what was it's called the old police station. It's not a police station anymore, but it was really interesting to see it in the film, like the fact that where I live is still sort of as underdeveloped as Notting Hill was in the 60s. Yeah, so what we're going to do first, we've actually got an amazing group of people here as a panel. We're having this conversation, we're sharing this conversation today. So it'd be really nice to meet everyone. So just going to go around one by one, say hi, maybe like just very quick, briefly, like in a few words, what you spend your time doing. And then we're going to watch this little trailer of Mangrove. Charlotte, would you like to start?
Hi everybody, good evening. My name is Charlotte. I am a vegan and organic hair and skincare specialist, and also a health and wellbeing enthusiast. Nice to be here with everyone this evening. I'm done.
Thanks, Charlotte. I'm just going to pick on people. Is that all right? Kevin, do you want to say hello next?
I knew it was going to be me. Right, I'm Kevin. Not working currently, but when I do work, I work within the kind of youth and community development area. So I started off as a out and out youth worker, mentor, etc. Worked in schools, range of settings. Nowadays, I tend to actually train adults on good practice around youth work and community development kind of stuff. Yeah, and that's me really in a nutshell.
Thank you, Kevin. You do amazing trainings on unconscious bias, and one of the other people that you work with is here today. So Martin, do you want to say hello next?
Yeah, good evening, everyone. Thanks for the invitation. My name is Martin Scott. I work alongside Kevin with our unconscious bias workshops, and we do some stuff via a kind of this thing called freeresilience.co.uk. Just a little bit of a plug there in connection with our little organisation. By trade, I'm trained to be a teacher in secondary school. And I'm actually in a school in Chingford at the moment teaching geography. I'm the head of geography there at the moment, but I've done head of faculty roles and taught history, RE for many years, socially. And those are my kind of my passions really, to try and find out a bit more about young people and and what makes society tick, what makes them tick, and try to build them up so they can kind of be, you know, tomorrow's better people. So that's me in a nutshell as well. That's me.
Thank you so much, Martin. Thank you for being here. Leela, am I dropping you in it a bit if I...
Oh, yeah. No, you're not dropping me in. Nice to meet everyone. My name's Leela. So I'm also a teacher, Martin, same field as you and same subject, so history and geography. At the moment, I'm running an organisation called Black British Studies, which is teaching children, adults, anything about Black British history. And yeah, that's one of my passions.
I'm so excited to hear from you all today. I'm really excited. So yeah, I had a little discussion with a few of you in our group, like what we should talk about today. Oh, my kids are making loads of noise. Yeah, and because it's quite topical, the new film on the BBC about the Mangrove 9, someone suggested that we might, oh, Yvonne. Yeah, if we have a friend of mine who's sort of here in the background, so I think they're gonna like wave if they want to join in, but yeah, so it's just gonna be you four, and then if my friend also wants to sort of pitch in a bit later, then she might do. But thanks for asking, Charlotte. Yeah, so someone suggested, I can't remember who actually, that we talk a little bit about what's raised in the film Mangrove by Steve McQueen. So there's a little trailer of it that I've got now, and we're gonna watch that. I'm probably gonna have my baby babbling in the background, which I don't really want to happen.
First made a robot which absolutely what I was holding, okay. And it snapped.
On Sunday, the 9th of August in North Kensington, a demonstration took place against the police, which degenerated into totally inexcusable violence. There may be some who believe that they have been the victim of injustice at the hands of the police. Others who, like parasites, feed on these beliefs and seek to turn them to their own advantage, deliberately creating hate and violence. These defendants are all guilty of the serious criminal offence.
This attack on a black establishment is not an isolated event, but a sustained campaign against black people. And today we are saying enough is enough.
It's a lot. Is anyone...
Letitia, nice to meet you.
Hey, what's going on? You got tons of energy.
Esther, you're muted if you're coming in.
No, that happened last time. It's like the different screens on my laptop freaks me out. Has anyone not seen it or what?
Yeah, I haven't seen it.
Go ahead, Leela, first. Sorry.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, I was just saying that I haven't actually seen it. I've done a tiny bit of research into it. So I do know a little bit about the case and the background, but yeah, I haven't actually seen. Well, we'll be watching it.
Come on, go ahead, Kevin. Go ahead, Kevin.
I also haven't watched it. I was trying to watch it, but I was trying to watch it whilst painting, and so that didn't really work.
No, it's not the kind of thing that you can like multitask. You can't watch this and paint your house. This is like, it's a very intense watch, first of all. And I also imagine that it just brings up a lot of different stuff. I grew up with families who have come from like descendants of Windrush generation, and this is that like exact generation, and it's very graphic, and it's very raw, and it really it doesn't pull any punches at all with the sort of the injustice that was just brought down on a whole community of people, which was this, there was an invitation to arrive in the United Kingdom, and when the people that decided to sort of uproot and come to the United Kingdom arrived, what they were met with was something quite the opposite to what they were expecting. Does anyone want to come in there, maybe like give a response to that so far?
Right. What I was going to say is just looking, even just from that little clip alone, and the kind of injustice and the people galvanizing, and then it looks like they're kind of almost getting undermined through authority. It reminded me back in, I think in 1981 in Tottenham, when we had the National Front marching through Tottenham. And there was a couple of marches going on where it felt like it was legitimized in that they were doing this, supported by the police, who did things like wear ties with gollywogs on it, and actually kind of all perpetuated the youth kind of galvanizing together, but actually gave people criminal record for defending themselves and their area. And it's, it's that kind of thing, which is a kind of continual process right through that. So that was, so the clip we saw, or the Mangrove, was what, 68, and this was 81, so many years later, and it's still the same kind of continuum.
Could you say a bit more about Tottenham, Kevin, and how the community in Tottenham are at the moment, or maybe like in the last 10 years, what's been going on?
Tottenham is going through a lot of gentrification at the moment, to be honest. So actually the community is forever changing. When I was growing up, there was a lot of Caribbeans, and then it went from that to kind of a lot of probably within the last 15 years or so, maybe 20, there've been a lot of kind of the influx of the Somalians and a lot of other kind of community. And now it's kind of like any other area, you've got a lot of Polish, a lot of different kind of people coming in, but also you're getting the kind of young trendies coming back in, because Tottenham is now a hotspot because of the gentrification which is going on.
Yeah, thank you. And I think what happens with gentrification is the community has sort of gets like exploited a little bit in terms of, oh, this is now a cultural hotspot, or there's affordable housing here, and what my baby's making loads of noise. I don't know if someone else wants to come in. I'm going to hand over to Charlotte. She's going to save me. Just unmute first, Charlotte.
Sorry, guys, you're going to kind of get used to me. I should know to unmute by now. Okay, so this is quite a common thing that you find in areas that are regenerated, as they say. It's so, and there's always a sense of novelty with it, because the narrative from the trendies that come in is pretty much like, we love the culture, we love being able to mix and mingle. And yes, there might be an element of that, but you have a influx of money that most people within that area do not have. So therefore the way you see it is completely different to those that have had a foundation there for years and years, let alone the history and what they have been through, especially if they're Black or Asian, and the thick struggles that they've come against. I find, I mean, the trailer that you showed, I haven't seen the show in full myself. It is something that I do want to see. I am familiar with the story, and it has that same narrative that you hear with a lot of stories that were around that time. I know that we have had a lot of changes over the years, but when you see what happened the other day with the Sainsbury's ad and the uproar of the whole, pretty much so many people across England, it makes you think how much of that racism has actually been eliminated and how much is still actually underlying. It makes you think there's so many avenues that we can go from watching that clip. Because when I moved back to Hackney 12 years ago, and I have seen such a massive change over the 12 years, let alone the change that I saw when I moved back. So I don't know. Gentrification is a real thing. It's not a joke. It's not just regenerating an area. It's tearing apart a community. Because what you're saying is we're going to get rid of what's already there. We're not really going to invest in you. If you can't afford to live, if you can't afford to be a part of what we're doing, then you're going to have to go.
Yeah, could I say something about that? I think
Please.
Yes, please come in, Martin.
Charlotte's 100% right. I think when you look at, because I live right near the Spurs ground, and Spurs really have obtained a lot of land around Tottenham for relatively cheap, very, very cheap indeed. But the lack of development or investment in infrastructure has been the reason why they could do that. Because like Charlotte said, not investing in people that are already there is one of the strategies on how to keep the place depressed, keep the people oppressed, because you're not creating education opportunities, employment opportunities. And then it becomes just a simple land grab for those people who have the money to buy it at a cheap rate, and then obviously build it up so it becomes more expensive to be here. In the 80s, and Kevin will tell you, even where Kevin lives, down Broad Lane, that was a hub of activity for industry. But in the sort of late 70s, early 80s, factories and places started to shut down, which meant a lot of people lost their jobs. Places like Gaff Steiner, which is around there, a huge employer. But then it wasn't replaced with something to enable people to have an income again. Obviously, you had then the Tottenham riots in the early 80s, which I think was a consequence of that, alongside police brutality of many young people who were just sick and tired of being stopped and searched all the time. So I think there's a sort of a network of issues. And I think Mangrove kind of showed how police brutality agitate people who simply want to make a way for themselves. But part of it is also, we don't want you to be here to establish any kind of community and create business for yourself as a Black person or a person of color. And that's a strategy, I think, by local authorities. I remember a friend of mine, I'll stop talking a moment, a friend who I know, he had a small little space on Tottenham High Road, just where I live. And he was selling these Black books, history books, politics, about Black psychology, lots of great books. And he went to the council and asked them, can you give me some advice and support in establishing my bookshop here in a much more kind of long-term way? They basically looked at him and said, we don't want your kind of bookshop on the high road. So he realized from then, they don't want Black empowerment or any kind of empowerment of people of color. They want to get rid of and replace, you know. So there's some strategies that are going on here.
That reminded me of something I was looking at on YouTube that recently, I can't remember the name of the person. I think it's Dr. Anderson, a woman, I think. However, what she was talking about is something which she called white rage, which basically what that is about is that they're quite happy for black people to be impoverished, but as soon as you try to step up, they've used systems and structures to keep you down and undermine you. And that is what that kind of white rage thing was about.
Yeah, I mean, I think we've seen that quite recently, where you were talking about there's that woman that's created that magazine for black people, for black children. Well, yeah, sorry, it's not for black children, but it is about black culture. I'll be really specific about that, because that was one of the complaints about it, and she was really clear that it is for all children. But because it is again an example of black empowerment, Coco magazine, yeah. So she did one for girls initially, and then she did one for boys. But they're very kind of education orientated. And when she went on Good Morning, I think it was Good Morning Britain, to talk about it, there were so many complaints saying, oh, it's being very divisive, and why isn't she just trying to use to get her child into one of the existing magazines? And we all know the problems already of representation in the magazines, but this is a great example of someone trying to do something themselves. And I wonder if at the core of that if there is an element of, well, she's actually doing something that is not dependent upon the white community. And there's no reason, just the same way as black parents buy magazines that are white orientated for their children to enjoy, there is nothing wrong and nothing to say that, white parents can't, buy a black magazine or this magazine for their children to enjoy and to learn more about black culture, but also to, to take advantage of the education that is in that magazine. So yeah, I think we have to sort of, or let's say people who are so enraged really need to be looking at themselves and saying, what is it that is so triggering as to why you find this so difficult to accept? And I'll just leave it there. I'm not going to say more.
I think there's a very important point you made in that, I think sometimes as a black person, especially if you're like the ones who might be viewed as a middle class black person, your narrative, what comes out your boy, is almost the same as white middle class. So I think it's Fanon who talks about the oppression. The oppressed speaks the same language as the oppressor. And it becomes like that. And so when you start coming and start building yourself from a different place, they don't like it because they realize that maybe you're not actually buying into that kind of, almost like that kind of same narrative. You've got aspiration, but not necessarily the narrative background to go with it.
Yeah, Fanon in his decolonization theory, isn't it? He talks about actually burning down the house of the oppressors, and in order to rebuild the new house or the new structure or the new systems, you can't do it with the oppressor's house still intact.
Yeah. But there's also, I've been reading Back to Black by Kehinde Andrews, and he would say that that's the only way you can become truly free, is you can't be reliant on a system that doesn't really want you to be elevated in any way. It denigrates you in many different ways, through images we see, through incarcerating, through putting in mental institutions, lack of opportunity. Even when you have a job, you're less likely to have a leadership position in certain places, which means you don't direct the policy in those places. So it's very, very strategic. But what I'd like to say, I think when it comes down to, and Mangrove, I think, is a very good example of that black man wanting to start a business in a place, arguably, that his ancestors' efforts helped to build. And I remember reading a book called Capitalism and Slavery by Eric Williams when I was at university, and it was controversial when it was written, I think in the 50s or 60s, because it was actually insinuating, or not even insinuating, but clearly saying that British capitalism was built on the back of the slave trade. And the idea, the controversy was, there's no way that the slave trade contributed to such huge wealth, but it was a seed, it was the beginnings of. And I think white society is very, very easy to forget where their riches came from, And when you look at what's the statement? In every port in England, you'll find the blood in the bricks of you find the blood of a slave in every brick. But it's almost like white society is not willing to own up to that fact that actually black people built your country. Allow that man a little space of his own to have his own kingdom. They can't even allow that. It's crazy. It's crazy. But I think that's a huge issue. Selective memory, if you like, or blind to the facts,
The unconsciousness of it all.
Leela, do you want to come in, Leela?
Yeah, I mean, I kind of think, I sort of think that sometimes it's not unconscious, it is very strategic, because we've seen recently historians who are campaigning with the government and sort of asking them, well, we need to have this decolonization of the curriculum. We need to, sort of make sure this is all taught in schools. And it's deliberately, it's not by accident, it's deliberately left off the curriculum. The curriculum includes all these things about, slavery in America, but it is, it includes Industrial Revolution, but there's a very minimal amount of things in there. In fact, there's nothing, unless you as a teacher go and look for it yourself and you introduce it, there's pretty much nothing in there that really directly links Britain in terms of the slave trade and the wealth, and in terms of how much was ploughed into Britain in starting the Industrial Revolution. That connection is deliberately missed out. That's something even with, and I see my children have gone through school and it's not been in their schools, it's not been in schools that I've taught at. And so, now the fact that the government has said, well, no, we're not going to put it in. And of course, so many people signed a petition, now they're having to review it. But the fact that people have to fight every step of the way for that to happen, I think that's very intentional. They don't want the country to know. But I think if you really have an honest reckoning, then you have to start talking about things like reparations, which there's no way that any government really wants to be going down that road.
I think you're so right, Leela. I think I agree with everything you just said. And I think a lot of it, they don't want us to have any roots. To an extent, this is why we're consistently moved about. And then if you cannot fit into the new space that we have created, we will not invest in you. We will not put anything into you as we took from you, as we took from your fathers before, as we took, and all the promises that we made. We may let one or two of you go through, and then we're going to make a big hoo-ha about it and make it seem amazing that you got through the system, which then makes black and brown and Asian people seem like there's some type of inferiority, when we scientifically, we know that's not true. Imagine if there was a real equal platform. I really do believe it's fear. I really do believe that the stem of most of this within our government is a fear that if they really did allow us to have the footing that they foretold that we would have, we would accelerate and exceed in ways that would surpass them. And I fear that they believe that we want revenge. I've said this before. I stand in it. Imagine if that was true, which we know this is not true. What we want is an equality for our children and our families and those around us, all of our nation, everyone that came here, to have that same opportunity.
I think you're right, Charlotte. I think there is an inferiority complex within the system itself. I think that's something they've inherited from way back. I'm
Absolutely.
sure I've heard. I can't remember who it was, but there was, in the early days of exploration of Africa, there was somebody, it was some kind of king or some kind of person of nobility, saw an African nation. I can't remember which one it was, and he said that these people are so congenial and so kind and so nice and so intelligent, we cannot allow them to excel to a point where they will better us. We have to cut them down.
I've seen this. I've read this.
The nobility in those people, he recognized it. So I think there's something to be said about, if you have a group of people that are constantly talking about how great they are or superior they are, as in Great Britain, for example, they can't even call themselves great. then you have an inferiority complex. A person who's truly great doesn't talk about it; they just show it. They just do it. And I think that is part of the British system, the European mindset, is that they feel as though because they're in a minority group, that once Black people really start to excel, we're gonna supersede. You know, I constantly look at one example, and I'm saying this guy Lewis Hamilton,
Cutting out a
the
little
young
bit,
guy,
Martin. Losing you a little bit.
So, am I cutting out? Sorry. Yeah, Lewis Hamilton. When I look at that guy and how he's excelling, the only Black guy in Formula One racing, he's the greatest driver in the history of the sport. And it just, for me, it just speaks volumes. They're not even praising him in the way that I think if he was white, he would be on some pedestal. So he'd be next to Nelson in Trafalgar Square. You know,
especially at the rate.
But they're not it's not even being recognized in the way I think that it should be. He's the greatest driver in the history of that sport. You know, Tiger Woods. If it was darts or snooker, we'd be in there. You know what I mean? It's like, I think there's a fear that they have within themselves. And I don't know how they're going to overcome it.
I think an important thing with this, sorry, Charlotte, would you look to come in? Yeah, I think an important thing with this though is part of it is that they will let a few of us get through in things like sports. As soon as you start presenting yourself in an academic level or something like that, in a kind of different professional structure, that's when their rage really kicks in and say, hell no, we can't have an intelligent Black woman. We can't have an intelligent Black man, or whatever it may be. And I think that is where it really, really kicks in, because they recognize that we have now got that power to actually bring people together and raise us together. And I actually think part of the strategy is by consistently telling us that we are inferior and they're superior, and creating structures where we fail, where they create a false meritocracy, which we know doesn't exist. However, and they keep on doing that, it actually starts bringing some kind of psychosis onto us, where we start believing the rhetoric, and it's almost like a madness. You know, it's almost like a madness.
Yeah, it is a madness. The you know what comes to mind is the words from Akala's song. It's powerlessness, or it's, do you know what? I can't remember what the title is, but it goes like this: absolute power corrupts absolutely, but absolute powerlessness does the same. It's not the poverty, it's the inequality we live with every day that would drive us insane. Because it's the inequality which is hard embedded, right, into all the different systems. I'd love to talk about the education system a little bit more, because Akala talks about where he was exceptionally bright. He went to Pan-African school on Saturdays. He was put in a form in his year, which was for the slower learning children, or the children that needed more assistance. He said that when his mum came to school, it was like, I don't know, parents even or something, she was like, what the hell's going on? My son is really, really bright. Like, he's the brightest kid in his year, probably, but she had to kick up a big fuss. And then when he finally sort of was being taught in the correct class with the white boys with the big houses, you know, on the hill and stuff like that, and he said that he had a moment where he realized no one here in my peers are like, no one's smarter than I am. Like, I'm as good as anyone else here, if not I'm more intelligent. But that happened for him. No one gave that to him. Like, he had that realization, and then he owned it. So, like, this idea that it's given to you, like your opportunities or whatever, but there has to be like a taking somehow. Or power, like, power isn't given, it's taken. So I don't know, I'm just wondering a little bit more if we could say, like, how that in the education system or in schools, maybe Leela, you might be able to talk from your experience as a teacher, how it shows up.
Yeah, so I worked in a school in Hackney just over a year ago for about a year and a half, and I was a year lead, and that's probably the place where I saw it the most. So I mean, of course, I've seen it throughout. I mean, I've been teaching for 12 years, and I've seen it throughout my career. But you get a very different perspective when you're working in a pastoral role like that, because you get to see what's going on across the whole school, and you get to see the patterns, and you get to go in and observe lessons. And you know, the school that I worked in is it's a very high population of Black children and very high population of, in general, ethnic minority children. And it was really obvious to see, and I don't think it was intentional, but it was really obvious to see that that Black boys in particular were quite often seen as the people, just like myself when I was at school. You know, you're seen as the troublemaker. You know, if somebody's doing something wrong and it's not very clear who's the person in the class doing that wrong thing, they're automatically assumed it would be the Black child or the group of Black children that is doing the wrong thing. And then the other thing I noticed as well is that sometimes there's you know, they're already looking for that Black child or those Black children to do the wrong thing. And then in the process of observing those kids, you're missing out on some of the misbehavior of, let's say, the white children. The other thing I noticed as well is sometimes, you know, quite low expectations, children being put into the wrong class, being put into lower groups, as you said as well, Hester. But then also equally, there's sort of, as well as the way the rules were being applied, instead of there being children being given the 3 steps as they're supposed to be given, they quite often would be sort of for very small things, you know, be thrown out of the classroom unnecessarily, for example. But also I saw on the opposite side, especially with quite young staff, members of staff, the opposite, where they're not giving the children enough of a, let's say, the behavior. They're not expecting very much in terms of behavior either, and they're not giving the routines. They're not necessarily giving they're giving the children too many chances. Okay, which again, I think that speaks to maybe not understanding. That's inexperience, of course, but not understanding also that a lot of Black families don't negotiate with their children. Certainly, especially when they're young, it's very much this is what you need to do. And the Black kids come into school and suddenly they're allowed to negotiate with these teachers. They kind of run away with that. So there's the opposite side of them as well. And I think there's a lot of education that needs to be done in terms of racial bias, but also in terms of understanding communities and also in terms of understanding parents. There's such a disconnect. And I really noticed that throughout my career, is that there's very much a them and an us. And I wouldn't say it's just about colour here. I would say it's very much about class, but it's also very much about ethnic minority groups in general being seen as, you don't care about your child. And it's something as a parent I experienced a lot with the schools that my kids went to, and they went to a variety of different schools.
Kevin, go ahead.
Yeah, I think that is another important thing, because what I saw was a lot of intersectionality. What I mean is that, for example, me as coming from a Caribbean background and so forth, what I saw was that oftentimes they had low expectation of Black boys generally, no matter where you came from, in what demographic. However, the Caribbeans, often they had even less expectations of us. So we were the first to be out of the classroom, followed by anybody of African descent. Then it kind of went up in stages, and then it was like the Caribbean girls and etc., etc. And it always had this kind of pattern of almost like which part of the world you came from. And then I could even be more specific as somebody who come from a Jamaican background, where it was almost looked upon like I had to be out of the class before the Barbadians. Maybe things have changed from that, but even when I was in the school system up to about 10, 11 years ago, it still felt like that was happening and that was the routine.
Martin, do you want to come in there with your experience in schools as well?
Yeah, listening to what Lady was saying, I think there are a number of things that I agree with. I also think traditionally, or should I say maybe 20 years ago, maybe even 30 years ago, Black parents or parents of colour may be left up to the system to define their son or daughter for them, because they trusted the system, probably because they thought it was going to be held in such high esteem. You know, I think it was in 1971 when Bernard Cord did the study on institutional racism in the educational system. And he coined that phrase because it was rife throughout. And then from that, you had certain policies of hiring more Black teachers in the classrooms, the teaching of Black history more so, the reading of Black books, a more cultural kind of diverse education for Black and Asian students, which saw an uplift in terms of student progress. But I think even today you have a case of students not knowing how to navigate the system adequately. And oftentimes they haven't got the strategies or the will or even the time to challenge in the right way. And I think the system gets away with a lot of things, like defining their son or daughter as aggressive or not able or lacking insight or whatever it may be. I've seen teachers say that about students, and I would say, well, no, I think that student is actually quite intelligent, because from what I see the work she's doing, I think she's quite good. And I know there's a specific story where a history teacher said that about a young girl. She was in my form and I disagreed with him. And I told her, I think you're very intelligent and you must not let anybody tell you any different. That girl, when she got in contact with me about 5 years ago and said she's on a course to become an airline pilot. And it's because I gave her those words that she felt encouraged to pursue her education. And she had a science degree, and she was traveling around the world. She's doing all these great things, and she had to get in contact with me because I gave her a few words of wisdom about her potential. So there's some talent out there that's being missed by the system, and maybe on purpose, or maybe because of lack of insight, or maybe because of the ideas that they already have in them about the incapability of Black students or Black people in general. So it's quite a dangerous thing, I think. And I think Layla's right. There's a lot that the system is not doing to encourage Black students in the right way in the educational system.
Can I just add something to what you've just said? I agree completely with what you're saying. There's also the element of not understanding or not being able to distinguish between children or young Black people being assertive and young Black people being aggressive. And we see that all the time in adults, but it's the same sort of thing happens in schools where, you get a group of boys together laughing and joking, and people assume they're being aggressive towards each other or to others. Or if they're, if they say something that have an opinion in class that might be contradictory to the teacher, especially if it involves things to do with Black history and things like that, again, it's seen as challenging the teacher. There's lots of instances where I've seen that they're being labelled as being aggressive, which then gets them into trouble in terms of being sent out of class, which becomes a spiral. So yeah, there's all kinds of layers to this. And again, that's where I think that educating teachers to be able to recognize their own sort of racial bias is something that is really, really important.
Could we talk about that now? Because we've got a lot of expertise in the room. I'll come to you in a second, Charlotte, but it's about the unconscious bias, right? So what has to happen? I'll come to Charlotte first, and then this is my question, what is the process that has to happen to address this unconscious bias, this implicit bias, which is they don't know they're doing it, right? That's the whole issue. So people will deny, like a doctor will deny giving more attention to the white patient than the Black patient, but the studies show that the Black patient gets offered less painkillers or whatever that study was. So yeah, that's my next question, really. I know you're going to say, oh, well, you're not supposed to ask us, it's not for us to solve, and I know that, but there's just so much experience here when it comes to unconscious bias training. But over to Charlotte first.
Well, I think what you said actually leads into what I'm going to say, because when you sit back and you listen to things that are said to our children via teachers, things that are said to us, to our children, when you think back to what we were taught about us once we were conquered. It's like this negative narrative that was sewed in. I think we have to take it back. I think until we understand the implications of slavery, of when we was stolen and what it actually did do, and how we were programmed and how we was taught so many negative narratives about ourselves, and then how people and then how it had just maybe diluted itself over the years in certain areas, but it's still there, and how it is still infiltrating its way through our systems, through teaching, through all the workplaces. I mean, it has to be addressed. And I really do believe that white people in general need to really see the reality of what the past has done to a nation. I really believe that until you address the root cause of the situation and hold up your hands, you can't have a complete, maybe clean slate isn't the right word I'm looking for, but you can't have a eradication of this situation. I think there's certain, I want to use the example of children playing in the playground and young Black and mixed children being penalised as being aggressive, when it's a white child or a European child of another culture, it's not seen the same way. That is something, when I look back to my childhood, it was the normal. And I remember having my own children, and I remember going through moments of thinking, oh, yes, you know, this is how it is with young Black children. This is how it is with young. No, it isn't. I had to retrain my mind and think about how I talk to my children and how I see my children, because I could really see evidence of programming. There's so much of it all around us, but I feel like some of us are so in it, we can't see it yet, but there is a mass awakening to it as well at the same time. But it does need to be addressed at the root cause.
Layla and then Kevin, is that all right?
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah, I completely agree with what you're saying, Charlotte. I think it's so ingrained into our culture. There's a lot of things that people don't even realize that they're doing is essentially racist. But I think that a lot of it stems from lack of education, lack of knowledge about what Britain's imperial past is. And it has to, it can't be just in schools. It has to be something that on a complete, the whole of society needs to be educated about the realities of Britain's past. So this, idea, I think someone said about Great Britain, I think once when you know about all of those things, you do start to sort of reflect on your country in a slightly different way. And we haven't gone through that process that other countries have gone through. So, if you look at what Germany, the process they went through after Nazi Germany, they went through a whole re-education process of their citizens. They did all kinds of, they looked at the social aspects, they looked at the education system, they looked at reparations, in terms of, Jewish community in Germany, but also looking at in terms of Jewish communities in Israel, for example, and survivors of the Holocaust, and looking at statues, and the whole kind of looking at the laws as well. So you need, I mean, that's quite a radical thing, and that's not going to probably happen in our lifetime, but on the most basic level, you need to have education and before people can even start to think about adjusting their racial bias. And then just one other thing as well, I mean, racial bias happen. Everybody who grows up in a society, we're all kind of programmed to it. As Black people, we can be biased against the Black people as well, and you see it on a regular basis all the time in schools. Whether it's security guards following people around, Black security guards following Black people around. It's there on every level. So we're all kind of a part of that, and implicit bias is something that that conditioning is there, that we need to kind of constantly be checking ourselves and being aware and continuously be learning about what's going on around us, about other cultures, and challenging our own stereotypes. And that doesn't just happen as a one-off. That's got to be something that happens on a regular basis, that we're all kind of doing.
Yeah, right. So I remember, again, working in the school, and a child, he came from, cannot remember where he came from. However, he was talking and he didn't string the word together in the way of somebody who is indigenous to this country. And I remember the teacher actually saying, try and talk properly. You know, they weren't trying to be offensive. It was just their natural vernacular. They would say, I remember challenging that teacher saying, what does talking properly mean? At which point they got defensive that I wasn't allowed to challenge. And I think it's that kind of openness about actually maybe looking at things like your own language and things like that. And, you know, and again, I think going back to the point where Layla made about we're all kind of indoctrinated within the same thing. I remember my parents, for example, if I went into any kind of patois, stop talking like that, boy. You're English boy. You know what I mean? And they would turn down English and I mustn't talk like that. Almost like, so now I have to fit into something which actually didn't fit me. And when I'm trying to adopt something which I felt closer to, I was also told that wasn't me. You know, and it's that kind of juxtapose, that's juxtaposition. And I think a big part of the issues within things like in places like schools and education system, and I would say youth work, where I've done most of my practice, is through things like language we use. Really, really is. You know, and people say things naturally. I'm again like they will talk about the aggressive boy. I remember there's a boy. He was about 5'10", a black boy, and someone said, "Oh, he's a big lad, isn't he?" When they're frightened of him. Though his white counterpart, who did the same thing as he did, who was about 6'2", was just a boy. He wasn't a big boy. He was just a boy. You know, and it's things like that with language, which is really, really important. I think we need. That's one of the things which you might be able to pull them up on immediately because you can't see what they're thinking, but you can hear their language.
Yeah, and commenting on the physicality as well, somehow it's limiting that person into a particular expectation or stereotype, right? Like, oh, well, then you'd make a great boxer, or oh, you're going to be a great basketball player. All these kind of things, which like, what do you mean? I didn't mean anything by that. Martin's talking about microaggressions and actions. I wonder if you could talk about that a bit more.
Yeah, I think sometimes when you're pigeonholed and you're somehow subtracted from what you want to be, a lack of choice means you're not actually being seen in the way that you feel you want to be seen. You're not actually being heard in the way you want to be heard. You're actually being defined as being something that's almost like a caricature of a real person. And I think sometimes when you're in spaces where things that you experience as normality is seen to be abnormal, then if you haven't got the right kind of resilience and strength, you're not willing to express it with real confidence. And I think that's what microaggressions does to you. It kind of chips away at you on a regular basis, on a daily basis. That's at some point, it's going to be a case of the straw that broke the camel's back. It's going to break you if you're not strong enough to go home and reinforce yourself. You know, the line I always use is when Chris Rock, he had a joke where he said, when I go out into my business meetings, I have to kind of respond in the way that they want me to. When I come home, I have to be extra black just to balance myself out again. So, you know, a lot of black people, if they're not strong enough and not kind of looking towards the community or certain kind of books or music or poetry or images even that can strengthen them, then they're gonna break. They're gonna break. So I think there's something what Kevin said, which it really resonated with me, in that sometimes when you're speaking in your own vernacular, it seemed to be negative or it seemed to be second rate. And I think from my perspective, I want to promote the idea, no, this is a major part of me. And in fact, sometimes what I do when I'm amongst white people at work, I'll bruck out in some patois. I'll say something in a certain way to make it seem as though that's Jamaican or that's African Caribbean. Because I want them to know that's a major part of who I am. And it is a major part of who I am. So there's no shame to that, no embarrassment. You know, and if they want to ask about it, then I'll bring them in and tell them exactly what that means or what it's about. But we have to promote who we really are with no shame, you know. Anyway, that's what I think.
Thank you. And I think that's about showing up in authenticity wherever we are, and that self-love in action as well, isn't it?
Yeah, that's right. If you got that, yeah, it's love. It's love of your traditions, love of yourself, love of your family, your friends, your culture, your food, your traditions, your religion, whatever it may be you're gravitating towards. All those things, like a Muslim would wear a hijab, those things are part of you. Your language is part of you. And it flows in a certain way. It's ironic, Kevin and myself, when we talk about appropriation. And oftentimes you see in mainstream certain kind of Black vernacular being used by people who don't, you know, it doesn't come from them, but they're using it to show empowerment. So it's ironic that why should we feel denigrated when we're saying it? Because it actually is a major part of who we are, you know. It's like, you know, there's a scene in what's it, Guess Who's Coming to Dinner with Sidney Poitier, and I think it's Spencer Tracy, and he's having that conversation with him about the way Black people move. And I think Spencer Tracy talks about that movement, and then Sidney Poitier says, well, I am the Watusi. That's who I am. That's part of my tradition, that movement. I don't need to mimic it. It's part of me. So, yeah, man, it's time to grow up and accept difference. You know, that's what I think. White society, white European mindset has to become more mature and see that actually we're very shallow and blinkered. There's a whole world of color out there that we need to understand and embrace. That's how you battle it.
So white people are the minority, right? The global majority are non-white. So there's like this new term that I heard a few months ago, which is people of the global majority, which I guess it would so terms are reductive, aren't they? And they're offensive in lots of different ways. And heard, you know, BAME, BAME being used or being told, well, it's reductive, it's, you know, it's offensive. And same with BIPOC, Black, Indigenous, or people of color. So global people of the global majority, but it still makes like white the default. So it still like presents this white lens. Like you've got white and then you've got other. Whereas really you've got white is the minority. And what I wanted to, oh no, my children were coming and I lost my train of thought.
You said, is it about authenticity? Is it the true story?
It'll come back. It'll come back. Whoever wants to jump in.
But I think there is, again, I think there's another important thing in that what you're just saying, because one of my friends, she consistently talks about the idea that she believes a big part of the reason why Black, brown people appears to be failing in countries like this is because we take our default as whiteness. And so that's what we're measuring against, rather than looking at who we are as individuals and measure against ourselves and our cultural heritage and so forth. We measure against a scale which is built by somebody else. So we're never actually kind of managing because we didn't set the scale in the first place.
So they constantly put a bar saying you reach our standard, and realistically we didn't want to reach your standard until you made us believe that it was the only standard. So I think it was Martin that said earlier on that, you know, until we build something for ourselves and go with it and invest in ourselves. And I think you also said, Martin, or was it Kevin, about the bricks, that there's a drop of blood in every brick in London. We have, in England, sorry, we have, Black people on a whole have built up everyone's economy, built up everyone's country, built up everybody's, sorry, my mind's gone blank now, but just, it's just, you know, being used as a building block, let's say. And it's about time that investment is put back within our own, setting our own standards, building up our own people, our children. No, that does not mean that we're excluding and we don't want to be involved with any other nation, but we need to be encouraged that we, by ourselves, that it is worthy to invest in ourselves. We need to see more of us and be able to identify us in positions of strength and growth and have something more for our children to just connect with. We're worth the investment.
I agree. And I think the big part of the challenge is that it's been so entrenched on so many different levels. Like, for example, simple things like belief system, me growing up in a church, or I might not be a Christian, but it's all about measuring against another marker set by the Europeans. And then that is very much within our belief system, which actually becomes our soul. So it's almost like our soul has been ripped out and replaced with another soul, which doesn't belong to us.
Beautiful. That is the truth. That is the truth. From the moment of birth and conception, there is a cloud of lack. There is a cloud of not enoughness. There is a cloud of you need to become more. You need to do as we do. The more Black and mixed race people, brown people that I see, people see standing in the truth of who they are, it's a strength that just speaks without words. It's happening. More platforms like this, more discussions, more groups, more encouragement to just be. Because what I noticed growing up is when there was confidence in Black, brown, Asian people, it was seen as an arrogance. But whenever I used to see my white counterparts, if they were confident, it was like, oh, you know, it's great. You know, that's great. Well done, well done. Or if it was someone else's color, it was just completely different. Oh, pull back a bit, come back a bit. You know, you don't want them to think you're arrogant. You don't want this. Well, why is it arrogant to be proud of achieving stuff? You are. We need more of this. So now, I mean, oh gosh, I encourage my children, stand in your truth. You are absolutely fantastic in everything that you do, and be proud of it. And encourage those around you. We need more of it.
But how to counteract, or bring into balance the damage. I've been told you're not enough, because it's a lot of
having enough and not believing it. I think for me, it was just I'm sick of this. It's a lie. It's not true. Started inwardly.
Well, I would say a clear strategy, and one that I've used. I need to read about my Black history. I need to read about the great things Black people have done from the past. Ancient civilization, whether it be ancient Egypt, Kemet, Kush, Mesopotamia. It's about language, culture. You're talking about mathematicians, astronomy. You know, you're talking about heart surgery and conducting electricity. These are great things that Black people have contributed to the world. The use of currency that was adopted by Europeans and taken as though they invented it, but it was invented a long time before them. So the moment you kind of have these great things in your mind and your heart, there's no one that can undermine you. You can call me on the names under the sun, but I know where I'm coming from, and because of that, I know where I want to go to. Um, and I think that if we can kind of persuade others or talk to others and listen to things coming from others that is telling that same narrative, no one can hold us back, you know. Um, and the collaboration with white people who also know that truth, I'm open to, but I'm not willing to participate with certain white people who don't want to open themselves up to that kind of true narrative, because it's just a waste of energy. But it's about the greatness, not about the negatives. It's about finding the greatness,
Yeah.
and that establishes a connection, a good connection.
I agree. I agree. And I think, I mean, like for myself, I went more for an experiential kind of journey. So I was growing up and seeing that, yes, I was bright, but then by the time I got to, I think it's 11, 12, where someone said to me innocently, where do you come from? And I said, England. No, no, no. Where do you really come from? And I thought, wait a second. If I can't come from the same place as you and we're in the same class and I grew up here, who am I? Literally that kind of experiential. And then I started to talk to other black children who we all might have faced certain kind of situations and so forth. However, I was also the guy who attached myself to the most radical person I've ever met in my life at the time. He was also around my age, and the two of us used to have these discussions all the time. And I think that idea of us empowering ourselves from within. So when we started to have the conversation without, we were in a position where we can almost talk from confidence, even
Yeah.
a 13-year-old children. Yes, we got kicked out of class regularly. However, that was just part of the journey we needed to do. I needed to go.
But you know what, Kev? I think sometimes when you're challenging the system in some way, it actually can be the making of you. Um, it was Hester earlier on talking about Akala in terms of his experience of the mainstream system. I know he said that it was the Saturday school, the Black History Saturday school that he went to, that was his saving grace. So it wasn't the mainstream system that supported him. It was something community based outside of that that gave him a true sense of who he really was. That's why I think when he stepped back into that system, he could see it for what actually is, and he could question it in a way that those educators wouldn't like. But it didn't stop him from questioning it. And I think that can be the making of greatness, because oftentimes I think people who are what so-called troublemakers in the classroom, those are the great people who leave and are empowered to do something really fantastic, because they can see possibly how much of a sham the mainstream system actually is, and how many lies are actually being told, or the full truth isn't being revealed. So they probably got more insight, similar to yourself, and your brethren. So that's
I agree, and I think you have to kind of self-educate. I look at someone like my nephew who was exceptionally bright, and his thing was, in schools they might say you're predicted a B, and he knew that he could get a B by coasting, so he just coasted because he just met the criteria which is set for him. However, he went home and to learn about himself and self-study and say, this is where my real challenge is, learning me, not coasting to that B.
Yeah, I think aspirational sort of vision is what we need to pull back into the community. I think looking at my parents and actually a lot of my relatives, we were always told to aspire to high levels. And I've got cousins who are great musicians. I've got cousins who have PhDs, who are doctors, psychologists, a lot of really inspirational people who were not letting anything hold them back, because they were told from the get-go, You can be whatever you want to be. You just have to put your mind to it. And I think that's a way of escaping this system that doesn't want anything from you. We've got to inspire people by telling them how great they actually are, which goes back to my story of that young girl. You know, so we need more educators.
And that's everyone's responsibility. I mean, I see my responsibility not just to my own children, but to the other children that live in my community. What I also am very active in is fighting for climate justice, because we know that what's happening is just like when development happens and it displaces communities that are historically like migrant communities, even though there might be like fourth generation migrants. We know that like in Stratford right now, the Silvertown tunnel that's been planned is going to be like devastating to the nearby area. It's not going to affect anyone that actually lives in Stratford. Same things when the Olympic development displaced people, made them, you know, have to move out their homes. They also, there was a lot of like pollution, all sorts of toxic, awful stuff that was actually like dredged up. A friend of mine was sort of telling me more about it because they actually worked on that project. We've got this huge like sewage thing that's come through Deptford. There's certain areas of London that are seen as like, or all over, not just London, but I mean, the justice movement, the climate justice movement in America, you know, it's like the town of Flint with the water, and the Lake Michigan, and there's got one of the biggest natural freshwater lakes in the world, but they cut that water off to the community of Flint, largely African American population in that town, and instead, and so it's the home of General Motors as well in Flint, Michigan. And instead, they made them drink the water from this polluted river that had been polluted for ages, like decades. And they told, and the authorities told them that it was safe to drink. It certainly wasn't safe to drink, and all sorts of crimes were committed. And then the worst part of that story is General Motors realised that this dirty water from the river was actually like affecting their car parts, like corroding their car parts. So they got the clean water from the lake, while they made all the human population have access to this dirty water. And I mean, there's so many different stories of that in America, but also like the devastation that happens with large hurricanes and places which are very prone to devastation. Like, it's sort of being forgotten about, like it's elsewhere. In Niger Delta, Nigeria. I mean, what happened last week was there was the anniversary of 9 people that were executed by the government in Nigeria because they stood against Shell in their extraction of oil in the Niger Delta and Shell were directly instrumental in the deaths of those 9 people, because they said, we don't want anyone to stand in our way, you need to get rid of them. And that's what we're talking about. That's the kind of level of injustice, and this idea that certain people are disposable and other people are priority.
Isn't it even, and I'll correct me if I'm wrong, isn't it even that Pfizer, the company they're using for the COVID vaccination, right now they're up on a can't remember which place it is, somewhere in Africa, I think it might be Nigeria, are actually trying to put in a £1 billion fine against them for actually giving them dangerous medication to their children and things like that. I think that's the thing at the moment, and these are the same people they're going to get to endorse the vaccine, which all of us are supposed to take. And I'm not going into the conspiracy thing. It's just like you said, it's the kind of level of what we are working with.
So it's all of our responsibilities to put this right. So that's kind of what I want to say to the various people that might be watching so far. You know, this is going to bring up lots of different things for different people. I got that question as well, Kevin, where are you from? And because I went to I was born in Hammersmith, but my mum got us into a primary school that was in Kew. But I mean, like, why she did that? But we also moved 7 times before I was 7. So we weren't like rooted anywhere. And I was just a little bit darker looking than the other children that lived there. And you would get asked that question all the time. And that's just a tiny, tiny amount of that sort of questioning that I imagine you will have gotten anywhere, you know, anywhere that you've gone. So to the white people watching, instead, when that feeling comes up of discomfort, of defense, of like, well, I don't do that, well, I'm not a bad person, it's like, no, it's not about that. It's not about whether you're a bad person or not, but we've all grown up breathing this same toxic system. A friend of mine who runs educational courses, she gave this amazing quote, and I don't remember who they're quoting, but the quote is about it's from a book or a lesson called Why the Black Children Sit Together in the Cafeteria. And it says that if there's smoke in the air and we're all inhaling the same smoke, the same foggy air, like you don't know that you're inhaling it, but there's no way to take it out of the air. And that's what racism is like. It's just this fog in the air. We have no idea we're breathing it in. But that's the only air that there is to breathe, because that's the system we've been raised in.
I think it's
Leela, can I come to Leela? Because Leela hasn't been speaking for a while.
Yeah, I mean, it just really spoke to me, all the things that you were saying about Flint and the things that happen in the Niger Delta, that I think that, you know, it's like we have to kind of widen our perspective quite a lot in terms of where we need to go and what we need to do in terms of improving the lives of Black and brown people around the world. But at the same time, I do understand that people feel that you kind of have to also sort of take care of what's going on in your own backyard as well. So if you're having difficulty, because I'm also a director on Bannister House Solar, so we put solar panels on our estate, and it's a social housing. So it's the first time that was done. Well, not the first time, so it was the largest one when it went live in the country. But it was so difficult to do and to get people on the estate interested, because, and I understand it was hard for me to even get involved in the beginning and become a director, because you're just so worried about your very basics. And of course, it's all about also fuel poverty and providing youth training and things like that. But if people don't have the basics in their life and they're really struggling, and again, Black and brown people are disproportionately struggling, then it's quite hard to find the time to then put your energies into campaigning and things like that. So it's a really difficult balance to strike, and I don't have any real answers to that, except to say that I guess you kind of have to almost put your own house in order first, like what Martin's saying, to try and achieve a level of sort of comfortable lifestyle in your own life, to be able to then go out and fight for these other things. So it's a difficult one, really, isn't it?
Yeah, it's absolutely about local. I mean, I find myself in these spaces a lot of the time with people who are like in the climate movement, and normally what I'm doing is saying, who's not here? And is that important to you? Who's here? Who's not here? Is that important? And if it is important, then you need to figure that out. Because it's not enough to just invite someone into your space and say, here you go, come in, you're welcome. Like, there's a lot of ignorance, especially about social inequalities in this country.
And it's the essence behind it. Like, there has to be an authenticity, because a lot of the time, unfortunately, within these type of movements, there is a tokenism. And I think that one thing Black and brown people are absolutely exhausted of is being used under any type of tokenism. So for us, what I hear when I have this type of conversation is, well, for us, it's simple. Stop being racist. Implement the things that you need to do. Give back what's not yours. Sit down within your tribe and discuss the atrocities that you're doing to those outside of it, and stop doing it. Whichever way that works within your government, do the work. And I feel that, I mean, look, as we said earlier on, yes, there are a lot of white people that are awake to this situation, are within allyship within this situation. But the issue is those that understand what they're going to lose, because I think what they feel is that what they have is more important to hold on to rather than to let go of, and to allow others to have more of a equal footing. So really and truthfully, the more of you that are aware, spread the word, pull people up when you see them doing things that are not okay. When you see injustices within our young people, like you said, Hester, you look out, you see your community, all the children within your community, you see that you have a responsibility to them. Keep doing it. Speak to others that maybe don't see that responsibility. If you see that ill treatment, if you see that injustice, speak up about it. I mean, I suppose there's also an exhaustion of, well, how many centuries do we have to explain that what you're doing is just not okay, and it is purely in the benefit of your own?
Oh, thank you so much, Leela. We've absolutely loved having you this evening, and your experience is just incredible. And I need to talk to you about how you did that solar panel project, because I'm trying to do that on my estate.
We can have a chat on call me, you've got my number.
Yeah. Oh,
all right, thank you everyone, you take care.
Thank you, Leela. It's been great.
All right, thanks. Bye.
Bye.
Yeah.
There's some amazing things that are in the chat right now, and I was just wondering, because as someone was speaking, I was thinking of that Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Can you say a bit more about that, Kevin?
Yeah, I spoke about the hierarchy of needs in that we're talking about having the basic needs met and so forth. However, the idea is that you have the basic needs met and move forward. But one of my friends, she always quotes this idea that, particularly as a Black, brown people, like one of the baselines is feeling loved. And she said, we could shower all the love on her in the world. If she's not feeling it, is she stuck? And can she ever move off of that bottom rung and ever feel like she can actually elevate herself because she's not feeling what you say you're giving? You know, and that's the kind of almost, again, that system weighing down on the fact that you don't love her, that we don't love ourselves, you know? And so you don't believe when people are telling you. And that's kind of the take I was talking about in the chat there.
Rewriting the narrative.
Yeah,
Rewriting the script.
go on, Charlotte.
This is something that's so dear to me. It's so dear to me. It is so important for us to know our history and to know what was achieved by those who went before us. And it is so important for us to understand our brilliance. And I use the word brilliance. I remember when I found out years ago as a younger person that the first brain surgery was done in Egypt, that blew my mind. It really did. It just blew my mind. And that for me was just the catalyst to make me do my own study. And then when I saw everything that had happened and what we discovered and what we'd invented, it was amazing. But then when I went away and I'd look in the mirror, there was still that, but I couldn't do that. So there was a lot of having to, every time I would tell myself something negative, to reiterate that with something amazing. And for me, that's what worked for me. Positive reinforcement, positive meditation time, positive prayer time, spending time at oneness, knowing that it was worthwhile investing in who I am and encouraging those around me to do the same. And it's hard when you do not have a surplus of luxuries to be able to do that, i.e. time, i.e. finances. But when you find, it starts with a tiny seed. I know it's a cliche, but it is actually the truth. Sometimes that time might just be in the bathroom when you're sitting down. It might just be that 5 minutes of, no, you can do this. You are everything, whatever it is that you tell yourself how it works. But it is so worth investing. And then, especially if you see others and you see them struggling, it takes nothing to lift them up. It takes nothing to tell them that they're seen, but not to say it from your point of view, to encourage them to see it for themselves. This is something I no longer do it now, but when I used to fitness instruct, when I used to coach, this was something I always used to tell my clients, because so many people would look to you to be the one to fix them. But really and truthfully, no, it comes from within. Because the moment we're born, we're taught to look outside. But we really have to see the greatness within ourselves and be a mirror of that to our community, especially as Black people, but as people, to people as a whole.
Yeah, I agree totally, Charlotte. I think going back to Kevin's Maslow hierarchy of needs, remember the very apex is self-actualization. And that indicates that you're constantly seeking, if you like, novel ways of finding out what you're about. You know, you're up for a challenge. You're interested in life, because everything's interesting. And it doesn't stop. It's an ongoing, lifelong learning scenario. And that's, I think, the best way you can be as a Black person. If you're wanting to find out what you're about, don't be afraid to have an expansive mind. You know, is the person that talks about not fixed mindset, but what's the other mindset? Not fixed, but growth mindset. Growth mindset. I think that's really important when it comes down to trying to find out who you are. That's the biggest question. It's not what you are, it's who you are. So those kind of material things that people find important, especially in today's society, capitalist society, that's not the greater part of who you are. It's the spiritual connection that we need to have, and spiritual development that we need to be buying into. And you know, once you have that, the world is your oyster. I just think there's two things we're fighting against, and it's kind of historical. The first thing is almost like a Willie Lynch syndrome, that has been inbuilt from hundreds of years ago by slave masters to almost for slaves to denigrate each other. And then there's another thing called post-traumatic slave syndrome, where you do get Black people and parents even, who in some way will put down their child because they want to save them from a harshness or a possible harshness that could happen to them. So they don't want the child to shine. They don't want the child to be seen. And I know Kevin talks about this sometime, and he said it to me before, that the thing we sometimes are most afraid of is achieving. Because if we're put in the spotlight, we're afraid of how do we cope with that then? Are we going to be able to continue to be as good as people are saying we are, or we should be when in the spotlight? And so success can be fearful, and therefore maybe don't be successful, because then you don't have to show yourself enough. But we can't be afraid of that. I think that's the thing. We must be willing to gravitate towards success and take it day by day, you know. That's what I say.
What's that quote about? Isn't the fear, our biggest fear isn't that we're insignificant, but is in recognizing our own greatness.
Yes.
I have misquoted that, I am sure.
Something about exceeding our wildest. Yeah, you did good.
Kevin.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, going back to following on from something that Martin was just now saying, I was looking at video just yesterday about this idea. It was referring to the black man and about how we normalize pain. So, for example, during slavery, the slave master might have taken two of us into a hut, let's say, and said, the first one's going to get 10 lashes, the second one's going to get 15 lashes. The first one gets 10 lashes, walks out to the other slaves and say, you see, he wasn't brave enough to give me any more. The second one takes 15 lashes and come and say, I could have taken the pain all night. And what we start doing is normalizing that situation of just taking consistent abuse, and it just becomes our normality, and we kind of just leave it there, and then we bring that onto our children and teach them the same strategy of coping.
The more pain you take, the stronger you are.
That's the one.
Yeah.
Well, you know, I think that's really a really is it a metaphor, or what would you call that? What Kevin just said. I think it's metaphoric, isn't it?
I think it is a metaphor.
Or an allegory. I think oftentimes as black males, we're afraid of expressing the weakness in ourselves, because we feel as though it's not manly to do so. It's not masculine to do so. Like, you shouldn't be crying. Grow up, why? You know, toughen yourself up, all those things. And I think the thing that causes us great pain is when we're not seeking the support that we really need. And that is part of the fragmentation of the black community. I think over here is because we haven't sought each other out. In fact, what we've done, we've treaded on each other's heads and held each other down, more and more so than when we
But that was a taught action. That was a taught action through survival.
That's right, yeah. And it's base. It's really kind of primitive.
It is.
Primitive, just so
and it was also a sport, can I just say? Because our masters would be, you know, the ones who could overcome the other. You know, it was a battle. So you was championed.
Yeah.
So the more we push on each other, instead of seeing each other as brothers and sisters and stuff, instead of you know, we're taught to see each other as opponents.
Yeah. Well, there's that scene, isn't it, in the Django, and you know, Django Unchained, where you do have Leonardo DiCaprio as a slave master, has those two men fighting to the death, and only one can come out as the winner.
Yeah.
You know, really savage. Really savage. But they had no option.
And go back to, sorry, Hester, go ahead.
No, I was just wondering if, Martin, you could say a little bit more about how it shows up in communities, because I've just heard that yesterday as well, how it's one of the populations and migrant communities that hasn't built each other up in the same way that maybe, you know, Vietnamese community or Bangladeshi community. I'm just wondering if there's any more you can.
Could you broke up a bit there. I couldn't hear exactly what you said. What did you say?
Sorry, because I just heard yesterday this spoken about as well, about not holding each other up in the way that maybe other communities that have migrated to the UK have done so or were taught to. So, for instance, like, you know, Pakistani or Bangladeshi community or Vietnamese community, where you support others' businesses, where you'll sort of network, and, you know, the sort of the success of communities where they're very much taught you support one another and you help each other to rise and grow. So you're talking about the opposite of that, and I was just wondering if you could say a bit more about how that shows up in communities.
I think within the Black African Caribbean community specifically, in the 60s when they first came, you had that thing called partner, which was a kind of financial mechanism whereby it was a support of people as a community. So if you put money in, one person would get that lump sum of money, then they'd utilize it to put a deposit on a property or start a business. And then over the period of time, maybe a year or 2 years, they would also put in that pot and others would draw from it. There was a collective kind of mindset then. But I think what's happened is that over time, the religious aspect, and I think it is religious, has been undermined. I think also a lack of investment within the Black community has caused them to see that those kind of collective kind of concepts are removed from my individual pursuit of what I need to survive. I think also during the 80s, when you had Margaret Thatcher come in, again, a heightened sense of individualism where money is king, materialism is the main focus, and I need to get it over you, which is part of the capitalist model, isn't it? So I think there's like, we've kind of become assimilated to a system that doesn't want us to achieve collectively. Muslims, Hindus, Sikhs, they have not assimilated in the same way that we African Caribbeans have. They've kept their own cultural base, which ties to their religious thinking. Religion for them, because it comes from the East or from Asia, is very, very important. It's central to their thinking. It's central to their everyday operation. They're not going to see money above God. In fact, it's the other way around. So we're kind of a bit lost in that respect. And I know Kevin said before that as Black people, are we sure where we're coming from? Is it Islam? Is it Christianity? Is there a case of the Africanism, call it animism if you like, that is more attuned to who we are and what we're about? We're very confused. We're like a mongrel. We don't know, we're not pedigree. We don't know what our strengths are in terms of our spiritual development. So it's very hard for us to know how to become collective. What do we what's our totem? What do we all look towards? And many cultures have something that they all focus on together, which unifies them. So we're a bit lost in that respect.
Yeah, uniting behind a common story or idealism. So that the book Sapiens, yeah, this one talks about that Homo sapiens proliferated in the way that they did, that because of believing in fiction, believing in story, and sharing story, and story being what unites thousands. So before Homo sapiens, the Homo erectus or the other Homo species would be limited to, maybe 100 or 150, and then they'd start fracturing and warring against each other and killing one another. But Homo sapiens, wise man, that's our species name. We believed we the collectivism that you're talking about is about all uniting. So it's maybe the crisis of faith or crisis of spirituality.
Yeah. Because I think that book as well talks about narrative being very important. And in fact, there's something in that book I read about the belief in human rights. And the writer, and it really struck me, he said, we believe in it and we actually see it. It doesn't actually exist, but we believe it exists. And that's the power of the sort of Homo. Sorry. Am I cutting out?
You are. I heard you say we believe in it.
Yeah. That book talks about the belief in human rights. And the thing about human rights is that you can't actually see them. They don't actually exist, but we believe they do. It's because we believe in the story of rights for all humans. And I think that's the power of the Homo sapien mind, isn't it? We're very creative in terms of story, and having the belief systems that consolidate our actions is very important. But if we don't have the right belief systems, then the actions are going to be very kind of spasmodic and diverse and just not consolidated at all. So yeah, you need that narrative, you need that story to back up your actions.
We have power over our narratives, right? Charlotte talked about that, rewriting the narratives and reclaiming the narratives. It's already gone 7:30. So I wonder if we could have a go round because we're finishing on human rights. You know, the very basic, the thing that connects us all, which is which there are crimes against, like daily, the crimes against humanity. That's what they talk about in Mangrove as well. How that community was treated was a crime against humanity. Like, how many more times are we going to stand by while the crimes against humanity continue? I'm not.
No.
I'm not standing by. I do not subscribe.
Absolutely. I just can't do it.
You want to sum up your last thoughts before we go, Charlotte?
You know, this has been a great discussion. And it has highlighted a lot of things and encouraged me to continue on the path that I'm going on, because it's a journey. And every day I choose to be better than the day before. And I choose to be a mirror to others to do so. This is me, Charlotte, Natural Woman Hair and Skincare and Fit Fitness Coaching. Check me out on Instagram, YouTube, Facebook. It's been a pleasure, gentlemen, and Hester, and Yvonne and Leela.
Nice, Charlotte. Nice to meet you too.
Nice to meet you.
Kevin, can we pass over to you? Some final thoughts before we go.
Final thoughts. Yeah, it's been a great discussion. Thank you all for the contribution. Give me another thing to think about yet again, as if my head haven't got enough in it already. However, it's always great to get involved and continuing the work. And I think it's also really, really important to see that we've got allies from, and I kind of hate that word allies, the way it's been bandied about, but I'm going to use it anyway, that we've got allies from all quarters, male, female, whatever. And that's what I'm going to say on that. That's my roundup.
Been a pleasure.
Thank you. Martin, any final thoughts?
A lot's been said this evening, I think, that makes me feel inspired to want to challenge in different ways. I think working in the classroom, I think it's a case of me being brave enough to tell the truth to the young people that are in front of me. Even though the government has talked about not introducing anti-capitalist rhetoric in the classroom, I think it's a case of us having to in any way that we can. And I think also working outside and working alongside people that are like-minded, I think that's very important too. Because it's a case of trying to be brave to make the world a better place. So, you know, that's what I get from it, working inside the system and outside the system simultaneously.
Thank you, Martin. I think my final thought is about, like, why is it so hard right now to reach for the truth? So, yeah, my children do have books on Black British history, and Ren got given Young, Black and Gifted, and just finding children's picture books where Black children are the main character. And I remember when, like, because you can't, well, anyway, it's just harder to get hold of the books, right? And then Ren said, why? But this is a book for a black child, or why? It's got a black child in it. And I was like, yeah. Like, think about that. How many books do you have with black children on the front cover? Why do you think that is? And then she started noticing, and she started pointing out. And when she sees like things on the TV, she's like, there's no black people. Or presenters on CBeebies. There was one morning when there was a female black presenter and a male Asian brown skin presenter. And she's like, oh, look, it's like she's calling it out, what she sees, where she sees it. Superheroes we talk about a lot. Where are the black superheroes? And then she'll be like, oh yeah, and she knows Marvel Universe very well, so she'll tell me. It's not normalizing it anymore.
Yeah, absolutely.
The absence of my brothers and sisters. You're my brothers and sisters as well.
Mm-hmm. I just want to say, if we're good enough to be taken from a land and brought to another to build someone else's, at some point, those promises that were made that were not fulfilled will be demanded. And here we are.
Thank you, everybody.
Yeah, thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you for hosting, and thank you all for
Brilliant,
the contribution.
Hester.
I really enjoyed it. Thank you.
Always a pleasure.
All right, I'm going to stop